Good morning, everyone, at least in the Eastern time zone here in Montreal. It's our future in space sustainability in the dual-use space era. In our previous broadcast, we explored the need for an overarching framework for commercial space that included business, technical, and legal aspects. We touched on the concept that all of these elements were necessary to be developed in parallel with equal importance on the success of smooth space operations. With SpaceOps 2025 happening in our backyard here in Montreal, and having just moderated a panel on sustainability in space, I'm pleased to be back with Kevin and Ruth to explore the added dimension of dual use and its influence on the evolving space landscape. So Dr. Ruth Stilwell, no stranger to our show, is the Executive Director of Aerospace Policies, adjunct professor at Norwich University, and served as senior non-resident scholar at the Space Policy Institute of George Washington University. She's one of the leading authorities on integrated space and aviation policy and governance. Her current work focuses on policy and regulatory frameworks for space traffic management, the integration of commercial space launch in civil space, and the development of cooperative traffic management for aviation and space operation in airspace above 60,000 feet. Among her publications, she is contributing author on reference books including Global Space Governance, an International Study, and an Introduction to the Spaceport Industry, Runways to Space. Welcome, Dr. Ruth Stilwell.
Thank you.
Kevin O'Connell, also no stranger to our show, is a recognized expert on space commerce, the global space economy, the U.S. national security, and many other topics. For almost 4 decades, he has focused on space commercialization and technological competitiveness and how to advance them in global markets. He has also focused on how these innovations impact the U.S. and allied nations' security. Kevin is the most recent recipient of the Arthur C. Lundell Thomas C. Finney Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing his influence on the geospatial intelligence community. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
So, dual use. Commercial assets may be considered a state asset and may be attacked due to its dual use function. We're facing several challenges that may be associated with that, but let me digress a little bit into how dual use has historically been confined to secure communications and GPS. The threat to adversaries of dual use space activity is changing. Space domain awareness enhancing dual use technology may be more threatening and hence more targeted. In the new space economy, with the proliferation of innovative space activity and the development of commercial markets for these activities, the types of dual use activity will multiply and add complexity to the safeguarding of dual use infrastructures. Dual use subject matter experts, or SMEs, and small, medium-sized enterprises are particularly vulnerable because they have less recourse for seeking damages or compensation if they become a target. There are so many commercial activities that can support dual use and become a target. There is no practical constraint to determine who is protected and who is not. Are there easy implementable, to consider, policy or regulatory activities that can help de-risk space operations and mission planning? And the easy implementable norms and regulations to make space activity safer or more transparent are not necessarily being implemented. So with all of that massive intro, Ruth and Kevin, maybe you give us a little bit of your perspective to open up the conversation.
Go ahead. So that was a massive intro, and there are a lot of complexities when it comes to dual use. And I think that it's important that we first talk about why we care about it in the first place. Like, why is space sustainability important? And it isn't space sustainability so that we can do a lot of things in space. It's so that the things in space can deliver value to the Earth. And sustainability didn't start with the environmental movement. If we look back at the westward expansion of the United States, the gold rush period, what did that lead to? It led to fisheries management. Why? Not because we wanted a lot of fish, but because the population would starve if we depleted those fisheries. If we think about space in the same way, we start to see it matters to the quality of life on Earth that we have a sustainable space environment. That includes the defense aspects and the civil aspects. So when we talk about dual use, is there an easy way to balance it? There's never been an easy way. But it is important that we do it, and we do so moving forward. And I don't want to get into too much detail yet because I know you have a lot of questions, so I'll throw it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Ruth. And it's great for us to be in person together. for the first time to do this podcast. Dual use is not a new concept in the space business. We've had it in virtually every data area. We've had it in imagery, GPS, et cetera. You've used the word balance. I'm always nervous about the B word because balance implies that there is a zero-sum game between what they do. I think that's not actually correct. And so the challenge that we have to think through is, how do we manage the dual use aspects? How do we think about the benefits that we get by virtue of something being a dual use capability? What are the challenges because they're dual use? You started by saying this whole protection and indemnification of satellites that are supporting military organizations. That's definitely a challenge, but the benefits that accrue from them as well. And so I hope we get to that in the next hour to sort of touch on various aspects of this.
So if we do want to change the word balance to the word benefits, then how do we look at it? Economic benefits, social benefits, where do you place that?
We often think that national security and economics are in some sort of a balance when in fact they overlap, and having strong economics actually contributes to your security. And so we have to be very careful not to always assume things have to be balanced.
Right.
You may actually get a benefit of them working together more effectively. That's a 1 + 1 = 3 or 10 aspect to this.
If I could build on that a little, Kevin, because you said that dual use is not new for space. Dual use is not new in technological development, even outside of space. And where we see these benefits, sort of the cyclical growth, we can look at where a defense technology evolved. And, something as simple as radar, that was created in order to defend, identify international friend or foe. But that cycle of innovation allowed it to be the underpinnings of our commercial air transportation system. So we can expect the same from space as well. If we make sure that we understand that's not a competition. We're not choosing, do we want to have this defense investment or the civil investment? What we want to do is leverage one against the other.
Exactly.
But we want to be responsive. We want to be relevant. And that's becoming more and more of an issue with geopolitical changes. We want to be relevant. What does it mean to be a good ally in space now? And who cares more about the sustainability of space than the military? So maybe we could have a comment on that, because I think when we talk about dual use, we think, okay, we're going to militarize space, but is that a negative? Is that a positive? I mean, what is it to do with sustainability and having dual use capabilities that actually more preserves the space environment than creates more problems?
Well, everyone that flies in space has an interest in space sustainability, whether you're military, whether you're the darkest, most secret program, all the way to civil and commercial programs as well. You've got an interest in sustainability, because if you don't pay attention to that, you put at risk those capabilities that you're already flying, and of course, all the future promise of the space economy that we have high expectations of.
Right.
So we can have this really wonderful view that everything gets better and better. But when we talk about militarization of space, we can't be Pollyanna. It's a dangerous environment, and the militarization leads to escalating tensions. And escalating tensions increase the risk that there will be explosions. And an explosion in space starts to create that condition of mutually assured destruction. And we don't want that, because we see that 2 collisions in space account for 60% of the debris that we have to avoid today. Now that space is more and more congested, can we risk having one more? It's not that, we don't want to have a big war in space. Can we risk one more accident or one intentional destruction of a satellite in a valuable orbit and still have a sustainable environment? So we start to teeter on the edge, and we have to be very concerned that if the militarization causes an escalation of tension, we get to that point where you've got that police officer with the shaky hands. And that shaking is more dangerous than the gun.
Absolutely.
Because it is the fear that creates the risk.
So without any regulatory framework, we can't optimize the benefits in space. We won't be able to do that. So how do we bring a regulatory framework to this question is what we talked about last time. And now, considering dual use, how does that change it? Because now the government is both feet in involved as a player using commercial capability. So what does the regulatory framework have to adapt to, or have to look like, or what challenges is it going to face to get to a point where it's making any difference, so that we avoid the inevitable congestion because it's all colliding. So is there an answer to that?
I think that the fundamental thing that we need in space is greater understanding of actually what's going on. And that has more precision, more accuracy, more timeliness to space operators, again, of all kinds.
Right.
There's a lot of things going on that we don't fully understand. And then, as we have discussed previously, there are ways to regulate both commercial activities that are different by definition from military activities for a rendezvous proximity operation, for example, which is done on a commercial basis by something that triggers a lot more concern on different people's parts.
Right.
So, and the regulatory question is very important because absence, whether you call it a regulatory framework, diplomatic norms, treaties, agreements, however you want to characterize it, if there are no standards, there are no accepted best practices, then there are no rogue actors. And so how do you know that somebody is behaving in a rogue way if you have not created this definition of what a good, safe operator looks like? And it's very important that we don't just say, oh, well, that's bad behavior based on my interpretation, your interpretation. We need to have this common interpretation of what is appropriate behavior in space. Right. And until we can articulate it and document it, we're just kind of hoping that everybody feels the same way we do.
So dare I ask who's leading the charge on that?
So I would say in the highly congested orbits where we have large constellation operators, industry is far ahead of the regulatory community in developing best practices. And that the regulatory community should take notice and not be so afraid to take action that they would be opposed. If you look at the best practices that have been published through facilitated by AIA, that was OneWeb, SpaceX, and Iridium. Why would a regulator be afraid to codify those things that the industry has already said, we think this is what we should do? So we see that the leaders in the industry are doing that. The problem is the industry is not homogenous, right? We have the actors that have the capability to codify and define these terms. And we have actors that are doing everything they can just to get their tech into space. Right. So how do we support those activities? By saying, while you're building the tech, here's the things you should build it to. This is the standard you should be looking to. And if we don't start like backing up through governments what industry is saying, this is what we think you should do, we're not giving support to the new entrants and to the developing companies or developing states.
Yeah, Ruth is exactly right on this. Industry is way out in front of most government activities on this. And frankly, the geopolitical environment really hinders the idea of collaboration or agreement between nation states who are focused on space. And so we need to look at these best practices in the hope that ultimately they're codified in some larger way at the international level. Interesting work going on in this area. For those that like the historical metaphors, you and I have debated before the air traffic control metaphor. The maritime example is actually the better example here, where the navies, the commercial navies of the world, actually developed best practices in a much more open space at the time that were ultimately codified in international law.
And so that's an important point because it took hundreds of years to be codified.
Right.
In
and we don't have that time.
You got 20 minutes.
So imagine yourself as a new entrant, and there are things to help you. Secure World's put out the handbook for new actors in space. NASA has guidelines out. The best practices document. Those things are starting to pop up. But where do you go to find it? How do you as a new entrant know that those resources are available? If we institutionalize that information, which is governments taking a proactive role to say, we'll put our stamp of approval on it and make it available and start to bring that into the regulatory framework and say, in order for you to get certified, you really need to look at these documents. Then we start to have a framework that people can work under. Otherwise, it's really the industry just trying to throw it out there and hoping somebody picks it up.
But Stewart, you asked about low-hanging fruit.
Right.
We just had a conversation over at SpaceOps where the bar here is pretty low. I mean, someone asked a question about the extent to which we have a list of space operators that with their telephone numbers or Twitter handles or whatever the heck it is you need to communicate with them. That seems something that can be resolved pretty quickly, to accumulate that kind of information. Other people talk about people sharing their technical data, the design of their satellites, things like that. And then above that, ephemerides and maneuver plans and things like that. So the bar right now is pretty low. We can make some rapid progress in this area.
So is it about communication? Is it about sharing information? Is it about that and having more precise, timely information rather than all the false positives that we're getting in terms of potential collisions? It's a major problem about telling people you've got a warning and they say, I've learned how to ignore the warnings. How do we get through that other than through bringing more commercial activity to the front and saying we've got better systems, but those commercial activities that get brought to the front are also of interest for space domain awareness, which is a military activity. So therein is the dual use. It serves both sides of the equation. Sustainability and dual use, they go hand in hand. Everybody cares about it for different reasons.
Sure.
So I think the dual use element, and if we look at spacetrack.org, it's an important example of it. The dual use element provides an opportunity for governments to invest in this capability to make it available. Because all of SpaceTrack came out of, we have an interest in protecting US assets in space. And our interest then over time expanded to, we need everyone to know where they are and what their risk is and how they can avoid a collision.
Right.
Now, the movement over, and this is your expertise, Kevin, over into a civil agency, sort of expanded on that.
Right.
And where we are today, and I'm gonna pin you a little bit, is what is the importance of continuing with that in order to make sure we don't fall backwards in terms of space situational awareness?
Well, again, you said it right. We have about 20 minutes in this domain, not hundreds of years. And there are many reasons why we went for a civil space approach to this in Space Policy Directive 3, not the least of which was that we want to harness the speed of the private sector as we do this. Okay, this problem is changing at such a rapid speed. Again, we've just talked about this over at SpaceOps, where on a daily basis, people are launching, debris fields are getting larger, multitude of problems. The strategic environment in space is more complex as well. And so when you have a fast moving problem, you really want to leverage the private sector on this. Okay. Second, you wanted the transparency of a civil system that's just not possible on the defense side. And frankly, the defense people, the good people that have done this for 5 decades and fueled spacetrack.org, they have a lot more complicated problems that they need to deal with. And so part of SPD3 was getting them out of that mission set and building a credible, more transparent, global civil space safety system.
Right. Well, we set up a regulatory framework. Is there a possibility that we could make it, and you were talking about the little guys, could we make it more difficult for experimental programs, other types of programs to enter the market or be part of the market because they get weeded out in the name of regulatory benefit? What kind of risk does that pose?
No, we should be taking enormous experimental approaches to this. As you know, when I've talked about what we'll call the commercial SSA ecosystem, there's a wonderfully diverse set of capabilities that are in the market. There are radars, there are telescopes, there are space-based capabilities like NorthStar brings to bear on this. And there's the whole other dimension then of someone has to bring this together into a coherent picture on the ground. This is another area where space people typically get too excited about the space piece only. What someone actually has to do is put a coherent picture together on the ground. I think there's tremendous capability in the private sector to bring people in, experiment with these capabilities, bring the ones that bear fruitfully on this problem, and don't work with toss the other ones out if they're not helpful.
Yeah, I would expand on that to not just who can participate in SSA, but how the new entrants, the innovators, are able to access space. And we want to make sure that the regulatory requirements don't exclude that.
Right.
But we do have to take the safety approach that depending on where you operate is how high of a technical standard you have to operate to, because we do all have to protect that domain. And for the space situational awareness community, our job needs to be to lower the barriers to entry. So Pascal talked today about what information need to be shared. He said ephemeris, maneuver plans, the characteristics of your satellite, and who to talk to. Like the who to talk to is very important. Now, put yourself again in that you're not a sophisticated space company. You're a college program. Who do you share it with? right? You say, I'm happy to share that. Where can we eliminate those entry points? So if we have a sophisticated system that you have to do all of this to cooperate in, are there a layer of services that are for the, I'll walk you through it and hand me what you have and I'll translate it to participate in the system, so that we are bringing more participants in, not just to foster the industry, but so that we have the information.
Right.
So I get asked kind of often, does SpaceX need tracks? SpaceX needs everyone else to have tracks, because what we need is this high level of participation in SSA for it to be effective. Because if only the large operators participate, we haven't derived the benefit that we need.
How do you get the smaller players to participate?
Lowering those barriers to entry and letting them know what's necessary. So letting them know has to come in on that regulatory side.
Right.
Your license to launch has to include that you're participating here, but that participation can't be such a high barrier that it shuts you out of the industry. And that is a unique feature of government, right? Is to help. And we can do that.
Remember, when we talk about regulatory things, it's like the phrase sustainability. There's really a spectrum of things we can do. What we're talking about here are the relatively, I'll use a phrase we used to use, light touch of data sharing.
Right.
I remember an interview that I did once with a famous French documentarian, and she said to me, why don't we stop everything in space until we figure this out? And I gave a very unsophisticated response and sort of burst out laughing, not because of the question, but that's never going to happen. And what we really should worry about is a scenario in which there's a terrible crash in space, and that politicians with the best of intentions then take over and make decisions that could actually harm what we're doing in space and the potential of the space economy. You know, just to hit the brakes on everything. We don't want that to happen.
And this goes back to that fisheries. We are not looking for sustainable space for space's sake.
Right.
We are doing it because space delivers valuable services to people on Earth that are important for the quality of life, survival. The benefit that we have from space allow us to have not just the economy that we have, but the food programs that we have. Like we have to always focus on why we did it in the first place.
Right.
What I'm trying to get a handle on is, how important is it for us to pay attention to the fact that, as I said in the intro, once you're labeled as dual use, you've painted a target on your back, because you're now part of a system that includes military operations. Is that a priority? Is that just part of day to day and just there's nothing to be done about it right now? Or does it fit in the picture of our current list of to-dos? Our to-dos include better information, better communication, lower barrier to entry, and regulatory framework that facilitates all of that. But as you enter this dual use forum, the better you are, the bigger the target in terms of what you're doing that will not necessarily make adversaries happy. So where is that in the spectrum of what do we need to be addressing?
So this is a hugely important issue, and there's no answer yet because there are many dimensions of the problem. Remember that I was a co-author on a book in the late 90s about the use of satellite imagery in conflict, and now we see that in Ukraine. And those are very important lessons, but they drive a whole new set of policy decisions about how governments consider their responsibilities to and responsibilities from the commercial space industry. Resources are limited, so at a minimum, you wind up creating a situation where there are some people that have protection and some that may not. That's going to be very unpopular. But people are working on these issues now. Many national governments are working on these issues actively. They have to be thought through. Private insurance, government insurance, there's a financial component of this that also has to be thought of, as well as complications that exist on the ground. So huge issue, important issue in the world we're living in today. Okay. We don't have any solid answers yet on this. We have some early ideas about what to do, but we don't have any final answers yet.
I think you bring up a good point. Maybe Ruth wants to jump in, but I just wanted to add, who's going to ensure a small to medium-sized enterprise that brings forward a groundbreaking capability to detect anomalies in space and catalog UCTs faster than anybody else has before? You're right in the line of fire. Nobody wants you doing that. That's an adversary. So we're not going to give you insurance. What's the regulatory framework going to do? Are you essentially saying, well, I have a deal with the military that if I get knocked out, they help me replace? I mean, is that it's just by default?
That's
problem gets solved?
that's the decision space we're in, actually. What will happen? Who gets protection? Who gets indemnification?
Right.
There's a fairness and equity part of the story as well.
Right.
Because a lot of capabilities are now being used to support military activities in space.
Right.
So we can talk at this intellectual level about insurance and liability, but all bets are off when the missiles start flying.
Sure.
And so our interest, our common interest as a space community, is to prevent that from happening.
Definitely.
Because conflict in space is a lose-lose for everyone. I used the term before, mutually assured destruction, but we have to remember we have 2 collisions that cause 60% of debris. If we allow a conflict in space, we are done. There is no future space economy. It becomes the least of our worries. So it's very, very important that when we talk about dual use, that we don't start to elevate certain activities to appear to be provocative in nature or to escalate tensions. And if they start to appear that way, we have created a problem. Now, what if they're not that way? So Kevin brought up the proximity operation. We have a very clear future where proximity operation can be a very benign commercial transaction, refueling my satellite.
Yeah, beneficial.
Or inspecting,
Yeah.
I'll use inspecting your satellite, right?
Fair enough.
Come and look what's wrong with it. Right now, so I have a dual use asset. And I've contracted to Kevin's company to come and inspect my dual use asset because of a normal routine procedure. Now, 1 or 2 of the nations that use it as a defense asset see that happening. If they are not aware that I've contracted for that,
Right.
then what have we done? We have created these escalated tensions. So when we talk about information sharing, information about proximity operations and those transactions need to have transparency so that, say, we have a Five Eyes situation and only one of the countries is involved in this transaction, we've now gotten people excited for no reason. Now, most of the time when you contract for a service, you do not necessarily know every maintenance activity that provider goes through. So there's no reasonable expectation that they would report to you every time, right? It's a normal maintenance activity. We need to make sure that we have enough transparency that we do not create a scenario where a routine commercial transaction can be perceived by any of the actors in the system as a threatening
Triggering
activity.
event. Yeah.
Okay.
And we don't have that now.
No, we don't. We don't have a lot of things.
Because we do not have information sharing structures in place
Right.
that are required, transparent, and with high enough participation to avoid that.
Well, and to confuse the issue or maybe show how complicated the issue is, somebody operating in dual use benefits potentially from the ambiguity of their mission.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right?
You know.
So that, for me, slightly contradicts. You want everybody to know that you have a contract with Kevin. He's going to come and plug his equipment in and do a safe fuel transaction. But the next day, Kevin's close proximity capabilities does something else.
Right.
So that ambiguity doesn't leave you. It follows you everywhere you go. So whether you get taken out while you're doing what is a nice thing to do or what is then less than acceptable thing to do, does it matter? I mean, you're a dual use capability, so you're at risk all the time. And so it's clear that when you're doing that docking, we're going to be sure that that docking is clear. But as you're traveling around orbits in space, people are saying, well, I know what you're really doing up there. You're doing other things. So how do we address that? I have no idea.
So that's where that transparency requirement starts to have value. And that's that low hanging fruit. We're not asking for new technology.
Right.
This is just transparency. So if you are required to report those routine transactions, then you see that transaction happening that's not reported, you can assume that it is malicious. But
Or an accident.
Or an
We've taken the accidents out of the story too. We have to be careful about that. Or an attack that's designed as an accident, you know. So those are additional levels of complexity we have to pay attention to.
yes, but we haven't started with
No,
step
we have
A,
to start.
right?
We need to start things we can control.
The
not-
easy thing is let's require everybody to tell us, and then not telling us by its nature is suspicious.
So you touched on how advanced the constellations, the big systems are, at just taking care of their own problems right now, and they're doing that. Can they also, maybe you could expand on how they could also be helpful to the new entrants and bring them in? So I want to go back to your point that when a new entrant comes in, it's given a handbook. This is the rules of the road. This is what you need to do. It's built into your license. And here's the people you need to contact and work with. And there's if you like, onboarding into the community that involves somebody body in terms of not just somebody, but somebody that says you're going to be, onboarded in space, and you're going to be given the contacts you need and the facilities you need. For me, that would be the role normally of government to provide that. But in the absence of government, is it realistic for us to expect that the commercial enterprise would do that just for the sake of sheer necessity?
I don't think it's realistic, because where do they have the capacity to find who is going to be a new entrant? That is part of the licensing process. I think that the large constellation industry has done quite a lot. And in publishing their best practices, they have put a very clear forward push that perhaps what they need to do is to lobby the regulators to say, take this on board and use this tool and put in these requirements, and to help define the frameworks that allow those new entrants to participate. But it's not their job to foster an industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So first point on this is I'm reluctant to create a new bureaucracy. I think Ruth is right.
Exactly.
Large operators are publishing their own practices that can look at this. Investors are far smarter today than even, say, 5 years ago on things like a cybersecurity strategy or an orbital debris mitigation strategy. They're attending to this when they're trying to decide whether to make an investment. So there are other reinforcing aspects. Let me point to another piece of this, though, that I think is often misaligned, which is, people say, well, commercial operators don't want to spend any money on this thing called sustainability. And, no business wants to spend a dime on anything that it either gets for free or that it doesn't think it needs. And so one of the aspects of SPD3 was moving the basic service out, the free service out, because in many of the government dual use capabilities, we have what I'll call the free good problem.
Right.
Put that aside for now. Right. But they will spend money on things as they realize this is very important. The metaphor I've often used here is cybersecurity. Many will remember that a decade ago, people would say, I'm not going to worry about cybersecurity because the government is going to tell me when there's a problem. Well, that was proven false very, very quickly. And I think the way we're hearing commercial operators think about it today is to say, okay, I have some service from the government, but I have to give mission assurance to my customers. If I'm going to continue to generate revenue and profit and innovate, I better be certain I can deliver a capability credible. Again, absent accidents and things like that. And so we're seeing space operators paying more attention to this. We have to create incentives, rather than regulatory, sort of mandates. We have to create incentives to encourage space operators to pay more attention to these things. And again, some of them can be low-hanging fruit, like information sharing and things like that. So I dismiss this idea that space operators don't really care about sustainability. I think they actually do care about it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think they do, because the recovery can become impossible.
Exactly.
Right? You can recover from a cyber attack. You can recover from a plane crash. You can recover from a lot of things. Once the space environment becomes more polluted, the cost of operating there becomes too high.
Exactly. The costs go up.
For me, and I'm glad the questions are starting to come in from the audience, so I encourage that to keep happening. For me, there's a component of this that is begging for machine learning, artificial intelligence. There's a ton of activity. You talked about patterns of life. You talk about you did this 6 times and you do that 6 times a week on this schedule. So that's your pattern. This is out of your pattern. So outside patterns of life become flags. So it makes it more complex from a regulatory perspective to have validation of information that comes from AI. But I think that AI is an important tool in the kit to contain activities and understand activities. You guys have any comment on that and implementing that or tying that into regulatory frameworks, et cetera?
So we're seeing in the sensing world, we're seeing a new development that's fueled by cutting edge issues in machine learning and user experiences and artificial intelligence. And as I said at the conference, I think the characterization of the 130 million odd space debris pieces is a great task for artificial intelligence that is actually achievable today in a way that wasn't before. But what's happening in the machine learning and the user experience area is people are now able to ask questions in simple language and not know that they have to task a certain kind of sensor. That same application, again, I'm thinking about it mostly in the imaging world, where I would say, I want to go look at Stewart's backyard to see if it needs water or fertilizer. I don't need to know that I need a hyperspectral image to do that. By using the machine learning tools that we have now, you just type in, I need to see Stewart's backyard. That same kind of approach is going to benefit people who are trying to be much more precise about the risk to their satellites, who's closest, because as was highlighted at the conference, to date, we've pretty much had the ability to do freedom of action. You tell me I'm at risk of moving. If I decide to move, I could go just about anywhere I wanted to go. In 5 years, I won't have that luxury because the debris fields will be richer, it will be more extensive. The other threats may be more extensive as well. So we're going to need that very threading of the needle for space operators to stay safe in the very near future.
Ruth, no.
No, there's opportunities, right? And then the more that we can fuse data, the more that we can ingest more and more information, which we can't do. This is what computers are really, really good at. The better picture we can get of the environment we're working in. And the more precise information we can have about that environment, the more capacity we have in space itself.
And the faster we can get it into the hands of the people that
need
are
it.
operating,
Exactly.
that need it. I mean, speed, latency
Right.
becomes a major issue. So that's a technological driver. In the end, we talk about the responsible use of space. In the end of the day, you are relying on the operators, the mission operators, whether they're government or private, to behave responsibly in space. Like, how are we doing on that? I would say I've seen a lot of things that, and our team that works here in NorthStar, looking at the JCO activities, you don't see always very nice responsible use of space, but someone else's definition of responsible is not the same as my definition of responsible. I'm being responsible. I'm protecting my national interests by doing this. So, it all gets really messy really fast when you just say, well, I just want you guys to behave responsibly. Right.
This was Ruth's earlier point, which is some basic standards for what constitutes responsible behavior and therefore what does not constitute responsible behavior. That's a relatively low-hanging fruit.
And we saw that with the ASAT test ban.
Yep.
Right? That countries were happy to say, you know what, we do all agree that we should not be blowing up satellites using direct descent.
We did it a few times.
Well, we did it a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
We
The space
had
environment,
done it
the
in the
space
past.
environment changed.
Yeah.
And so, that you got this agreement very quickly.
Yes.
But it started with the affirmative statement that this is unacceptable behavior. Then country after
I like
country
that.
agreed.
I like that. I like what you said. I know that's why I want to foot stomp it or highlight it, is that, affirmative action statements, not passive. Let's be affirmative, and this is not acceptable behavior.
Right.
This is not something you're allowed to do. Let's not be saying, we just want everybody to get along. We want you to be really responsible in space. Okay.
The hope is not
And away
an
you
option.
go. It's like, no, you're not allowed to do this. And then we can, with that, hopefully, if we have enough statements like that, build on them to say, well, we're monitoring you, or we've done pattern of life on you. We've done this on you, that on you. It indicates you're saying that, but you're not actually doing it. So maybe it helps us put a validation process in place. And then there's the question of attribution and making sure that you're attributing activity to the right player. And again, for me, that comes back to more persistent revisit. Go ahead.
It gets to also how you structure your information sharing. And is your information sharing system structured in a way so that that information is attributable?
Right.
That it has provenance and can be traced back. If I said this is my maneuver plan, and I did something else, can that be checked? And not checked by a regulator, but by the community. And that is a very important foundational principle of your information sharing structure.
Makes me think of tipping and queuing. It makes me think of you pick up an anomaly. Well, the operators, our JCO team, calls it an anomaly. An anomaly happens in space. this one piece is now 2 pieces, is now 4 pieces. We picked up that anomaly. They were uncorrelated tracks. Now they're in the catalog, and that's your satellite. And that activity done quickly enough gets queued to an Earth imaging satellite that turns and says, snapshot, I just took a photograph of you. So attribution becomes routine. We're not far, but we're not there right now. We don't have something that responsive. And I guess my question out loud is, that I've been ruminating is, does it take that to have the impact and the effect that we want when we say we've made these affirmative statements, which I think are fundamental. They're the cornerstones, because you don't manage the technology, you manage people, you manage their behavior, right? So we can't manage the technology is going to run wild. So managing the people is, sorry, you're not allowed to do that. And we caught you doing that. So you're not doing that, right? So holding them accountable in whatever court you want to call it, public court, it's the fact that these rules were made and you're breaking them, has impact. And so I'm just interested maybe to get your comments on that.
We were kidding around this morning about Ronald Reagan and the trust but verify comment. You know, this is the same thing. Set a set of standards, a set of expectations.
Right.
Understand what people are doing in space to the extent you possibly can. When they deviate from the things that they say they're going to do, there's either a good explanation that's an accidental one, but everyone is aware that there's a deviation from it. Now, again, maybe it's a commercial activity for which there's full transparency. I had to change my orbit for this reason, whatever it is. Okay. Maybe it's maybe it's a military activity for which there's not a good explanation. That then needs to be dealt with within other national security channels, direct military to military, maybe even higher than that, you know, or worse than that, you know.
But you can't break a rule that doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
Can't break the laws of physics. One of the questions on the board, all the science and PhD guys are smiling because we all, I said quietly. We talk about codifying a regulatory environment, but what about enforcement mechanisms? Goes on. Launch licensing only impacts new deployments. We're already seeing risky and hostile behaviors in space, so you can't prevent them.
Sure.
They're already up there. What mechanisms can make a regulatory framework have teeth? And a critical component of that is accurate, detailed knowledge of activities in space that can be traced to specific parties with confidence. I think that person just made the question up as we were talking, but it was a good question. Any more comments on that?
So on the civil side, there's commercial penalties. You can remove a license from a company from being able to do something. There's, you know, that's probably the easiest place to answer this question. On the commercial side, I can do a lot of things. I can fine an operator, whatever. To when you move into the military domain, it has to be taken up in different channels, obviously.
Yeah, on the commercial side, you have commercial risk, whether there's a fining action or you just don't get the next
You don't
license.
get a license.
So, you decide whether you want to be an ongoing concern or end your company because of your current
Right.
behavior. But when it's state actors, that's a diplomatic problem.
Right.
And the diplomatic mechanisms trigger that. The concern I have with this question is because I get it a lot, what is the enforcement? What is the enforcement?
Yeah.
You're jumping ahead. We don't have the regulation yet. We
Right.
don't have the standards yet.
Right.
So we can have good, solid standards and even best practices with no enforcement mechanism, and we're still better off than we are today. The enforcement mechanism comes as you start to see people deviating from those.
Right.
But start with A, and we find too often that there's no way to enforce it as a reason not to create the standard in the first place. And that is not a good reason.
I go to the, between this question and the next one, I go to, I learned everything I know from watching Top Gun Maverick. So Top Gun Maverick, first movie, the Russian guy comes in to deny territory. He flips his plane upside down and gets right up on top, cockpit to cockpit, and flips him the bird and says, don't bother doing that again because I'm right here, right? So the next question is, thinking about that, how does the attribution of dangerous or aggressive space activities help deter or stop risky operators?
How to stop criminals, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is a solution that ends all problems, but it starts to to improve the situation. And we start to define the problem to that manageable level, as opposed to, there's an ongoing theory about the reason you lock your car door is because 90% of the problem is deterred by doing it. That you just deal with.
That's, it's such a simple, I don't mean simple in terms, it's such a straightforward answer. You got to keep it at the front, right? You got to keep that at the front. You're never going to stop a person who wants to break the law from breaking the law because they want to. But if the rules are, and here's where I try to think about it from the holistic approach, the overarching purpose of accessing space is to create economic benefit and increase quality of life. So if all we're doing is negative stuff, then we're working against ourselves, right? Like it or not, you're working against yourself. If you're not really using space to do everything that it's supposed to do, we're down to, we've got challenges, we've got opportunities, and we've got benefits. There's benefits to keeping space in a good place. So in a normal economic environment, which we have for a lot of industry on Earth terrestrially, there are sanctions, there are penalties, there are financial impacts of doing that. We're not yet, I would say, at a normal or a stabilized economic operation in space yet, but this is part of the process. And if you have economic fallout from behaving consistently badly, because space has historically been military, Neil Armstrong wasn't just a Boy Scout. He was a member of the military, and so were the rest of the astronauts in the early days. And the first space mission, Sputnik, was a military operation. So military has been part of space since forever, as far as we're concerned as humans. It's always been military, and now we want to commercialize it. And in commercializing it, we want to reap economic benefit. So you're cutting off, you're biting the hand that feeds you if you start disturbing the ability to make economic benefit.
Well,
so that's the right way to look at it.
Go back to your original question.
Yeah.
What we're suggesting is that simply organizing behavioral standards that we can agree upon in space, combined with extra transparency in space. The open question is whether or not we're actually going to deter, pick a number, 10%, 90% of hostile actions that go on in space. We don't know the answer to that question at this point. But having an enforcement mechanism on top of that would ideally add to that confidence. You're on a whole other set of issues now,
right?
Related to
gone off script.
Fair enough. I mean, how do we think about these dual use capabilities for the traditional purposes they had? One presumes that everyone that has assets in space wants to protect those assets. Again, maybe that's not a correct assumption, but we even think that the Russians and the Chinese have some vested interest in protecting their investments in space as well. And that is the basis for even a very slim amount of cooperation on this topic.
So we also have this opportunity when you're developing military assets to think about their future as a dual use asset. Yeah. And we haven't mentioned Golden Dome yet, but I think it's important to. So the purpose of Golden Dome would be to protect the people in the United States and Canada from attack from space. We also have a threat from space of re-entering space debris, uncontrolled re-entries. If we're designing technology to do this at detection level, can we also use that technology to detect uncontrolled re-entries and protect people on Earth from that? So as we start to see these problems that are civil versus military, how do we develop these assets so that we solve more than one problem at a time?
Right. Well, I think the answer is it's not the answer. Part of the answer is there's a system of systems approach. We have to look at space as a system of systems, and everybody can contribute some component to that system. But the ultimate output, at least from the hardware, software side, is information. And so you're managing information and to your benefit, to your benefit, to the benefit of the sustainability of the environment. And why are you interested in the sustainability of the environment? Because it has economic return, because it's good for my country, because it gives me the things I need and gives me a wealth and power or comfort or quality of life. I guess that's, sort of as philosophical as I can get in 2 seconds on why would we all care about making all of this work? Because if you don't, you're just going to shut down this great asset of space, and it's not going to be accessible. right? So the
Right.
doomsday approach is not really cool. And talking about whether or not you can survive the doomsday approach, which I think certain people have maybe thought about, maybe they should remain nameless without pointing fingers, that people would look at, okay, well, how long could I survive under a doomsday scenario and still come out on top? But that's not the right way to look at things. I mean, we have to think positively. Otherwise, we're just...
No, we have to think about adversaries that might think about it exactly
Yeah,
that
exactly.
way. I mean, that's the thing we have to protect against.
And how do we enforce that?
So if I could step back a minute, I mean, we need to think about like that philosophy, right? Defense is to protect us from the things that we hope will never happen.
Right.
But there are things that we know will happen that we can use those tools to improve the quality of day-to-day life as well.
Right.
So if we protect the use of space for defense purposes to prevent what we never want to happen, we are also providing all of the benefits that come from allowing the civil things to happen that benefit everybody else.
Sure.
Okay, we got 10 minutes left. I don't have any new questions on the board. I think we covered sort of what's been on the board. As we start to try and put a ribbon around this and help the audience walk away with what did I learn today, let's talk about the three categories as best as we can fill them up. Collectively, we've got challenges, we've got opportunities, and we've got benefits. So let's look at the challenges section and say, what do we want to say comes under the challenges section as far as our discussion has been today? Ruth.
I think the biggest challenge is that as we increase, and going back to that dual use asset things, the use of civil assets for defense purposes, we risk increasing tensions, and that there becomes an inherent suspicion that any civil asset is really a defense asset. And that creates tensions. And I think that that is our biggest challenge in the growth of dual use assets, is a mistrust between adversaries as to whether or not they really are dual use or if there's just a pure military asset.
I think the biggest challenge is the speed at which we're moving forward. There's no reason to slow it down, but we have to get sensible on these issues very, very quickly, because it's not today's problem. It changes tomorrow. It changes the next day. We're seeing a lot of dynamic change in the technologies that are going to space. It's not just imaging and SSA and things like that anymore. Lots of new things. We're talking about a cislunar economy. We're talking about things beyond that. And so things are happening very, very rapidly. And the canonical technology moves a lot faster than policy and regulation.
Absolutely.
This is the poster child for that right now. We really have to step forward on this and step forward on our efforts.
The laissez-faire approach has expired.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So with every challenge or every threat, there comes an opportunity. What are the opportunities that we've got coming out of this now?
So I build on what Kevin said. Our opportunity is to leverage the innovation cycle of the private sector in order to move ourselves forward. But the regulators cannot ignore the messages that are being sent very, very clearly from the industry that the laissez-faire approach has expired. The industry needs the help of the regulators to get these frameworks in place. And that low-hanging fruit, the information sharing, the behavioral issues that don't need new technologies to implement, we can't just pretend that magically it will all come together and everybody will solve this problem for us. It takes active intervention by governments to push this forward.
Yeah.
Which governments? I mean, the question on the screen, who's leading this? Is it the same players? Is it the United States?
The prominent space powers actually need to play the key roles in this.
Right.
All are interested, by the way. We talked before about UN COPUOS being one of the largest, if not the largest body in the UN.
It is.
And so clearly lots of countries, and in my travels, we see a lot of countries are really interested in the space economy, including not letting the current prominent spacefarers pollute things so that they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And so Ruth's answer is exactly right. There's tremendous opportunity to leverage the capabilities in the private sector to, I won't say solve, to mitigate the problems that we know are out there and create new opportunities as we go forward.
So then we go to the benefits. What do we want to put in the category of benefits of all this dual use consideration?
You want to start, since I've started them all first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first, the dual use aspect, again, space historically was leveraged first and foremost for security purposes with a positive view of how to do that. Okay. And so we're going to continue to leverage it for safety and security in space. Okay. And secondly, for all the enormous expectations we have of the space economy, be able to create some of the very important and breathtaking things in the next 6 decades of space and beyond, okay, that we've invented in the first 6 decades of space. It's nothing more, it's an enormous responsibility at this point that we have to take on right away.
Mm.
I'm going to say that the biggest benefit of dual use capabilities is it is an opportunity for governments to invest in a future space economy that has all of the downstream effects for their nation, that it improves the educational opportunities, the growth in their standard of living, all of the benefits that we've seen from the first few space ages start to move forward when we say this investment is not just a defense investment.
Right.
We're not just investing in what we hope will never happen. We are investing in what we want to happen.
Right.
I like that. It's I don't want to say optimistic, but I would say pragmatic, optimistic view of it, rather than thinking that we're doomed to bad behavior and we're doomed to always be policing ourselves.
But it's not automatic.
No, it's not automatic.
If we walk away from this podcast,
exactly,
it's not automatic.
Conduct yourselves accordingly. But
right.
But we have the technology. We can rebuild it. We can do something about this. The benefits are enormous.
Enormous.
They far outweigh the challenges. Right. The benefits are so huge for the economy, quality of life, educational, social benefits, improving quality of life around the world, and most importantly, serving those who are less entitled or at the beginning capable of serving themselves, developing nations, etc., and using this benefit of space to improve that quality of life as well.
But let me make a point that I made over in the conference, which is we're now beyond the world where a bunch of space people who are excited about space things. That's very natural. We're great at talking to ourselves. The real opportunities lie in the fact that so many new economic sectors, industries are stepping forward to say, gee, this space thing is kind of interesting. It's more accessible. It's not as expensive as it used to be. It's worth my putting down, pick your number, $250,000 to invest in an experiment that could equally create a whole new set of products and services that people will use here on Earth.
Right.
And so that's where my excitement comes about the space economy. None of it happens unless we find a way to be sustainable with what we're talking about here today.
Right.
I think one of the things we didn't get to, it's important to point out, is that the space community does not have the luxury of waiting for something catastrophic to happen.
That's correct.
A lot of terrestrial industries have said, okay, finally there was a crisis, now we can take action. Once we have a catastrophic accident in space, that damage lasts for 100 years and we're not able to recover from it. So we can't just hope for the best.
Agreed.
We need to take action.
Closing remarks, other than what you've just said? Anything else?
For me, governments need to listen to industry. Industry is not asking you to take a back seat. They're asking you to do something.
Yeah, we need to move, and we need to move now.
So, thank you for our live audience. Thank you for our technicians. Thank you for our online audience. I think there's a lot of takeaways from today that deserve more attention. The most important thing that I like to iterate in this whole process, same with what I said this morning at the SpaceOps conference, the people on the panel may be experts and may be on a front line, but we're all on the front line in space. Everyone's on the front line.
Yeah.
It's really about how well we can weave together through thought leadership, through discussion, through healthy exchange, a community that is addressing and realizing the challenges, facing those challenges, developing opportunities so that we can all reap the benefits. It really comes down to a community approach. So I want to inspire everyone that's listening with this panel, with this discussion. That was our objective, is to inspire you to keep thinking about it and to inspire you to get involved wherever you are. I like to say kamsahamnida to the South Koreans who came and joined us here, and anyone else who joined us online. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Until we see you, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, merci.
Ruth's so good. Thanks,
Amazing,
everybody.
amazingly quiet for a 2,000 person.
Yeah. There are 2,000 people in this room, but
Well, that's a
very
joke if you're online, actually.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.